A firm could be producing and selling thousands and thousands and thousands of products, but they might still not be profitable. Or even worse, they might actually be making a loss. In this video, we're going to look at how that works. Hi friends, welcome to Econverse. I am Abrar and I am a fellow student who topped in my GCSE Economics last year in Oman. On this channel, we make learning economics simpler, clearer, and hopefully a lot more fun. In this video, we are going to be looking at firms, their costs, the revenue, and their objectives. So let's get started. Firms in three main ways. We're going to be looking at them from how costs work, we're going to be looking at how revenue functions, and we are going to be understanding what a firm's objectives are. So I think it is essential that we start with the objectives first. So let's start off with the objectives of a firm. So the objectives of any firm are essentially of five main types, you could say. Firstly, any firm that is new to the market would want to survive. So survival is their first objective in the short run. And then you have an objective of growth. Any firm that wants to make it big wants to grow, either through internal methods or external methods, which we discussed in the previous videos. And then we have another important objective, which is social welfare, and this is also referred to as corporate social welfare, CSR, which is basically when firms try and contribute to society in order to essentially promote social welfare for trying to mitigate the costs that they have made on society. Like, for example, a good example would be that Starbucks has 99% ethically sourced coffee certification, and examples of CSR could be like, for example, they provide free college tuition for employees in US through Arizona state universities, etc. So all these things are used to have better impact on society. Now the fourth one is really interesting. It's called profit satisficing. Profit satisficing. What do you mean by profit satisficing? Profit satisficing is when you sacrifice profit in order to satisfy. So you remember it as sacrifice profit or profit to satisfy. And then last but not the least, you have profit maximization. What do I mean by profit maximization? Profit maximization is probably one of the most common objectives of firms, and that is to reduce the cost of production to raise revenue and profits. Now, these are essentially the main objectives of firms. Now, let us look at how costs function. So, when we look at costs, there are a few main types of costs that we need to understand. So, firstly, you have costs and revenue essentially has a lot of formulas that you need to know. So, how I recommend for you to understand this concept or learn it will not to be trying and sitting and memorizing the formulas. No, I think that's really stupid. I think rather you should try and understand what each cost means and how it works, so that way you'd kind of synthesize what the formula really means, and that way you'd remember it much better. So let's look at it. For the first one, total costs. So what is the total cost? The total cost is the cost of all items over a particular period of time. So the total costs can be taken by doing the average cost into the quantity produced, or by doing the total cost is equals to the total fixed cost plus the total variable cost. So any total cost has both fixed costs and variable costs. So for example, now let's look at this part of the formula. So the average costs, so number 2 is average cost. What do you mean by average cost? Average cost refers to the cost per unit. So when you look at the average cost, you can calculate it by doing total cost divided by quantity, or you can also calculate it by doing average cost is equal to average fixed cost plus average variable cost. Now we've looked at how we have total costs and they are split into fixed and variable, and then we have average costs and they are fixed and they are separated into average fixed and average variable. And now let's just look at some other formulas. So essentially, if you have done some algebra before, if you do maths, then this is going to be really easy for you. So essentially what you do is you make every single thing a subject of the same formulas, so that way you kind of, I think it makes sense if I just try and do this for you. So if you have total fixed costs, you can calculate it by doing TC minus TVC, or you can do AFC into Q. Now for TVC, you can do TC minus TFC, or you can do AVC into Q. Now for AFC, you can do AC minus AVC, or you can do total fixed costs over the quantity. Now for AVC, you can do AC minus AFC, or you can do TVC divided by Q. So these are essentially all the formulas. You just make each and everything subject, and that way you have all of these formulas. You have fixed costs and you have variable costs. So the key difference is that fixed costs begin even before production and fixed costs are really constant, whereas variable costs are costs that rise with a rise in production. So they are the cost of raw materials and etc., whereas fixed costs could be costs such as the rent of the place, etc. So we must remember to link this to diseconomies and economies of scale. Like for example, when you have increased production, after a while, after economies of scale, the average costs do begin to increase due to diseconomies of scale. Now let us look at revenue. We've finished costs, we've finished objectives, and now let's look at revenue. So when we look at revenue, what does revenue mean? It is the amount earned from the sale of goods and services. That is what revenue essentially means. Now it is key to note that revenue is not the same as profit. This is really important. So the key formula for this is total revenue is equal to the price of the product into the quantity. Now the price of the product is also called average revenue at sometimes. So the average revenue of the product, or the price, is calculated by doing total revenue divided by quantity. And then let's look at how to talk about profit in economics. Profit in economics is represented as pi. Pi, the mathematical symbol that is used in the calculation of circles, circumference, and area. So pi equals total revenue minus total costs. Or pi could also mean average revenue minus average cost. That is for per unit. Now we've looked at all of these. Now this is really key. So these four essential formulas you must remember. So when the price of the product is equals to the average cost of the product, or if the average revenue, if I must say so, the average revenue of the product equals the average cost of the product, this means that there is a break even. Break even is when the total revenue equals total costs, and when the average revenue equals the average cost, that means that the total revenue is going to equal the total costs. Now when your average revenue is greater than average costs, it means there's profit. And when your average revenue is lower than average cost, it means there is loss. And this last one is really key. When your average revenue is lower than average variable cost, this is called a shutdown point. Beyond this, the firm will simply not be able to operate, so it is advisable to shut your firm down the moment your average revenue is lower than your average costs, variable costs. So that is it for firms' costs, their revenues, and objectives. If you think this video helped you understand economics better, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to join the Econverse. I'll see you again in the next video where we will be looking at how some markets can be so fiercely competed.